Welcome to Catch You Outdoors. I'm your host, Captain Rob Mody's. Contact email, catchyoutdoors@gmail.com, website, catchyoutdoors.com, Facebook page, Catch You Outdoors. And yes, there's some new posts. I worked on it this week, and I'm going to get better at it now. Try to do at least a few times a week. I got a couple books available on Amazon Kindle, Bridge to Paradise, a book of short stories and some of my travel writing from over the past 15 to 20 years. Also, What I Know About Fishing Southwest Florida, labeled by readers as the book about fishing the salt along Southwest Florida's coast. Book 3's in the works. Working on it, people. Working on it. Hope we get it out this summer. And officially, I'm joining Waypoint Communications, which, by the way, has changed their name from Waypoint Collective to Waypoint Podcast Network. So there you go. I'll be starting on the first week of June. Don't worry, my podcasts will remain available via Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but they'll also be distributed by a dozen or so other podcast sites. Today's episode, number 35. It's hard even for me to believe. An epic fishing adventure in the Florida Keys. Oh my goodness, where should I start? Well, let's start at the beginning. That's probably the best thing to do, of course. Let me take you back to a little over a month ago. Jonelle and I were headed down to Islamorada for a fishing-related event at the Chica Lodge. The Bonefish and Tarpon Trust were holding their Circle of Honor inductions. And on the way, my wife, Jonelle, had a meeting scheduled with Josh Dickerson. He's the Director of Business Development for Southeast Multimedia. He works with Waypoint TV, which in turn broadcasts Saltwater Experience, Into the Blue, and working on a new show called Life on the Water. While there, we struck up conversations. I was sitting at the table basically watching the action with Jonelle, and what she was doing for her part of the meeting. And then in conversation, as the meeting started to wind down a little bit, they were like, well, what do you do? I'm retired. I don't do anything. Well, what did you do? Well, I was a fishing guide. Really? Yes. For years. And a radio show host. No, really, no kidding. And what do you do now? I said, well, I do writing and a podcast. And the podcast perked their ears up because unbeknownst to me, sitting there talking to these gentlemen, I had no idea about the Waypoint podcast. I knew all about Waypoint TV because I have watched Saltwater Experience for quite some time. It's a great show. And they were like, oh, well, we do podcasts. And I'm really, and eventually they listened and I got a note and a call and they wanted me to join Waypoint. So, that's how all that came about. While we were also there, fishing charters were mentioned. Josh was like, we got a couple of trips already booked. We got a Young Gun, inshore. Would you all be interested? I'm like, yeah, of course I would be. So the original trip was almost a month ago, about 3 weeks ago. I went out with Josh and this new captain, Casey Spalding. And, it was what I would have to call an amazing trip. It really was. I caught 2 of the biggest snook that I've ever caught sight fishing. So that's all I needed to know. And I discovered that Casey was an excellent guide. And so then the second trip popped up just a couple of weeks later. And this time it was myself and Jonelle that were invited to go to fish with Casey. So we went back down to the Keys. And this was just this past few days ago. And to say that I use the word amazing a lot, yes, I've been told, I know. But a lot of things are amazing, especially in the world of fishing. But I got to use the word epic in this case, and it's a word that I don't normally use. But epic is the only way I can describe what happened on this second trip. First of all, Jonelle got her big snook. She wanted a big snook like the big snook, and she got one. She got a beautiful snook. And photos were taken and high fives were made. And then off we went across the flats in the upper end of Florida Bay, way up by Flamingo. He took us to an area that was known to him as a tarpon place, a migration zone is really what it was. This wasn't like tarpon around the bridges or tarpon down on the lower flats or the hard to feed tarpon that are in the ocean. This is an area where tarpon move through in large schools, hundreds of them move through this area and they'll eat most anything. So Casey said to me, well, you can throw a fly which I had obviously done earlier in the day. And he got out the 10 weight, rigged it up, and said, "Okay, you're gonna get a tarpon on fly." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, great." Because let me tell you what, one of the hardest things in the world to do, and the guys that fly fish will tell you, big fish like tarpon, marlin, sailfish, they're just hard to get on fly. So we rolled up there, and long story short, man, I hit one right off the bat. It was like 11 feet from the boat. He's like, "Just toss it over there, just flip it. Don't even just flip it." And I flipped it, and the fish on, and landed him. And then not long after, probably 30 minutes later, I was on another one. I missed at least four, maybe five. I got a lecture from KC. I deserved it, which is pretty cool because I'm learning things from a captain who is young enough to be my grandson, which I find really cool. I find it, I don't know. I'd use the word heartwarming is probably the only way I can say I feel about it, because it's nice to see a young generation of guides and I mean, I'm an old guide. I'm a retired guide. I'm going to be 69 this November. Oh my God. Yeah, I guess I am. Holy cow. Anyway, it's nice to see these young guns out there doing what they do with enthusiasm. And he is obviously extremely bright. So, tarpon on fly, something everyone dreams of. Not just one, but I got two that day, and I had shots of at least four more, five more. I had a bad habit of I was using the right hand like with a spinning rod, pulling the fly rod tip away from the fish instead of leaving it alone and letting the fly do the work. Don't worry, I pulled it together. But without KC telling me that, I would have well, I did insist. I'm like, I can't be doing it. No, you're doing it. You're doing it, dude. You're doing it. I'm like, okay, okay, okay. I get it. You're right. I am. And Janelle standing there the whole time grinning because I think she thought it was funny too that this young gun is telling this old dude how to fly fish. Who's been fly fishing forever. But he was right. He was witnessing from the polling platform. So cool thing about being a guide. It really is. Casey's a fourth generation Keys guide. His father, his grandfather, and his great grandfather all guided in the Keys. It's amazing. I talked to him. He was 18 when he decided. The day he turned 18, he got a license and became a guide. He was homeschooled. He decided that's all he really wanted to do. And let me tell you what, folks, he does it extremely well. Just tickled pink. He has become our guide of choice in the Florida Keys for right now, and probably will continue to do so. About the things that I learned and what was going on during this trip. He The way that Casey works and the way that most guides work is through um, I'll call it rudiments or habits, if you will. There, you start to learn where the fish should be at certain times. And that comes from time on water. Now, granted, he's very young, but at the same time, he's hung out with people who've been on the water forever. And he's worked with them, and he's worked on boats with them, and he's worked in tournaments, and he's been around people that really, really know the water. An example of this is when we leave the dock, which is all the way down in Islamorada, ironically at the marina where Janelle and I used to keep a boat back in the 90s. That's where he's working out of. As we blast off, it's evident he has no GPS. He has no depth finder. He has him. And if you've ever navigated across Florida Bay, you understand how complicated that can be. It's not that you're going to lose an outdrive on something, but you'll probably run aground and be stuck for the rest of the day if you're not careful. Not to mention the Park Service will be very upset with you if you tear up a grass bed. But it was like, wow, this kid really, really knows this water. And Janelle and I learned that water back in the 90s the same way. We didn't have a GPS. We simply put a chart in our laps and worked across and, so, okay, here's that mark, there's that island, and eventually found our way all the way up to Flamingo, which is about a 20-something mile trip. So that showed me, I'm looking at this kid going, he's got this sense about this water. Well, the same thing happens with the fish. You start to latch on to where they should be at a certain time on a certain tide. He knew back in May, when we fished this thing a week or so ago, was that full moon, that the eclipse. Everyone was talking about it. That was the morning we fished, and he knew on full moon during about a span of 5 days or so that these tarpon move through a certain area, and he went there. He's like, we're going to get a tarpon on fly. We are going to do this. He was very adamant. It was not like we might get one. Let's go give it a try. It was like, we're going to go get one. And we show up and there are tarpon everywhere. And that's a sign of a guide that really, really, really knows his stuff, that knows the pattern of these fish and how they work and where they go and where they're going to be feeding. And to be a great guide, it takes that. And it takes a lot of time for most people. If you jump into being a guide, he's like, I'm going to be a guide. It's hard. I mean, it's really, really hard. But if you have some sort of background, if you have something where you fished all your life in an area, or you have friends that have fished around you, or in this case, you have a father and a grandfather and a great grandfather that have worked the area, then you definitely have a distinct advantage. And it shows. It really does show. So, some of the things I learned that I really honestly did not know. And I love it. When it came to the fly fishing thing, his flies were minute. Is that a good word? Miniature, tiny. they were they were they were not what we used on the West Coast. I typically threw something fairly large and purple. Lots of feathers on it, lots of bushy stuff on it, so that when it moves through the water, it would undulate. It would sort of, just kind of like a jellyfish looks when it moves through water. And I had good luck with that. I caught tarpon on it, but this was weird because I'm holding this little fly, which is pure black, from head to toe, with almost nothing on it. I mean, basically, it was kind of like a little tiny strip of rabbit fur, on skin on leather, little piece of rabbit fur, maybe 2 inches long. It appeared, and that was one of them. Then he had another one that was just tiny little feather, like marabou, like light, like marabou tied on a hook. I can't give you the size on the hook. I'm gonna guess it was a 3 or a 4. Wasn't real big. Crazy sharp. I'll tell you that right now. 10 weight rod. Bimini twist on the leaders, going down to. I think he said it was a 40 pound, but I'm not sure. I don't remember. I think it was a 40 pound tip. But everything was kind of lightweight looking, and that was part of the secret of working it. But what really amazed me was the size of the fly. I'm rethinking everything I do now with flies. I'm rethinking about the size. He's utterly convinced that they nibble, and that when you throw something big, they may or may not be decisive about it. They may be indecisive. They may take a look at it and go, no. Now, none of us know, is the fish thinking that's too big? Is it more than I want to eat? Is it too much trouble? Is it going to run away? I have experience with fish that size, and they run away from me, and I don't want to mess with that. Like finger mullet, things like that. Is this a morsel? Is this just a little morsel floating by that I can just suck down? Because that's the impression I got when each one went after the fly. It was like a sudden slurp. Well, one of them pounded the bejeebers out of one of the flies, but most of it was just a slurp, just come up out of the bottom. You see a flash of silver. Boy, does that get your heart going. Flash of silver, open the mouth, suck it down, and you set the hook, and off they go. That's how it's supposed to work. Doesn't always work that way, but it was magical. For me, that was at my age, I love learning. I love when I go fishing and somebody shows me something that I haven't seen before. And it's evident that there's a lot more to it than you think when it comes to getting a tarpon to eat something. Now, granted, a migrating tarpon is much more likely to eat than a stationary big fish around a bridge. My opinion is the bridge fish, or the fish on the ocean side of the Keys, are hardened. They've seen it all. They're extremely skittish. Of course, the water is crystal clear there, and where we were, the water had a nice green color to it. Had a little bit of Gulf water mixed in with it into the Florida Bay water. So you had a little tinge in the water. The fish outside I'm not going to kid you, they're tough. They're just tough. Basically you almost need like a live bait, a live white bait, threadfin herring, finger mullet, something like that on a hook to entice them to eat. And the bait's got to be lively. The bait can't just be floating out there in the breeze in hopes of you might get one on that. You really have to tinge your baits. Crabs are extremely popular out around the ocean side. This is different fishing. When you go up to the inside flats, the fish up there are in a migrating pattern. They are not in an eating pattern. And that is something that Casey was stressing heavily, which I also believe. The fish that are migrating, they are on a mission, and they're not going to be there very long. He said the window would be probably 4 days around that moon. And then it would probably happen again in June. There'd be some stragglers in June, but then it's over. And I didn't ask him about the reverse. I know when we fish the west coast of Florida, the tarpon come up, sit around, and stay with us June, July, sometimes as late as the first week of August, and then they've gone north up to the Panhandle. But there's a return trip, typically in late September, early October. Depends on when the weather shifts up north and starts to get cooler. It'll start pushing them south. That and the days get shorter, but they start to move south. And I didn't ask him if there's that same migratory path later. I'm gonna have to do that next time I fish with him. I'm gonna have to ask him that question. But it's interesting to see the migrating fish and how they react. So to back up, these little bitty flies were like these tiny little morsels. And the whole idea behind this morsel was to feed these fish that were just cruising through, that might just take a sip at it, but aren't really interested in chasing schools of fish like the ocean fish are, the ocean tarpon are. So it's a whole different mentality. And for me, that was a great learning thing, because the way that I view tarpon now, especially if I Gulf Coast fish them again, I will scale the flies way down, because those fish travel in schools. I mean, there's no doubt about it. While they are more of a stationary, sedentary fish, they're more like just they stay nearby for months at a time. They still travel in fairly large schools. You rarely just see a single tarpon all by itself. You'll generally find 8, 9, 10 of them, sometimes 20 of them all together. Sometimes they'll daisy chain in like a 25 or 30 fish circle. I think that little morsel idea might work better than tossing a large fly at them. Now let's focus on Jonelle for a second, my wife. She had not been fishing in a very long time on a guide boat. I mean, she's done a little bit of, casting at the beach, and maybe off a pier or two, or from a kayak, not recently from a kayak with us, but not a guide trip, and certainly not for big fish. And after my two big snook a few weeks ago, she was bound and determined, and so was KC. The thing about Casey that impressed me was he had a enormous amount of patience and understood her issue was that she hadn't fished in a long time, but that she's a great caster and she's very, very good at what she does. Once she gets her back into the motion of doing what she does, and believe me, she got better and better at it. And he gave her a very special little jig. I call them shovel noses. They look like a little shovel, little spade. Um, Chartreuse and pink were his main colors, but I've personally used gold and brown and done all kinds of stuff. But what was unique about these was he was pretty much tying his own fur and feathers to these. So wherever I don't know if he was buying plain jigs. I don't think you can buy those. I'm not sure, but I think he was probably buying somebody's jigs. I remember Hank Brown used to make a jig just like this. Don't know if they're still available or not, but anyway, these little shovel heads, what they do is, because of their shape, just picture a pointed arrow, more shovel shaped on the sides though. When they drop, they wiggle. They would do exactly what like a coin does. If you drop a coin in water, it works its way down to the bottom by jiggling from side to side. Um, Casey was tying on his special version of feathers and fur to get the color and the look he wants and the length that he wants. Some of them were a little longer than others, and some were short. But as it turned out, that was exactly what the snook wanted. I caught several small ones. One was decent. I lost one at the boat that was really pretty good. But Jonelle, man, she got the fish, 30 plus inches. We didn't really measure it. You just kind of hold it up and go, man, that's a nice fish. Take a picture of it, and everybody looks at the picture and goes, boy, that's a really nice snook. And it was. And I was really happy for her, because that was, in her mind, me getting away with her having to go to work and me catching two big snook was, she's like, I have to go do this. And she did. What impressed me, what I learned during this, first of all, I learned that Casey has an extreme amount of patience, and that's important to be a guide. You cannot be edgy. You can't force people to fish. You can't yell at people. You can lecture them like he did me, and I totally agree with that, but you can't yell at people. But you have to have that patience. Man, woman, or child, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're male, female, or a kid. And he had a ton of patience. What impressed me that I learned was, when I went fishing with him a few weeks ago, we used soft plastics on offset hooks, like worm hooks. They were weighted, And the soft plastics were your typical, like a Sluggo, just Zoom baits. There's a zillion different kind of DOAs, all those things. That's what we used, and we used a dark color. And the reason for that was the water was very, very dingy when we went. They had big blows for weeks at a time across the Keys. Well, we had them over here on the East Coast too. I mean, we had serious surf here, and so we were fishing right after the water had calmed, and so the water was still fairly messed up from stuff coming out of the Gulf and from all the wind off the bottom. If you don't know Florida Bay, when the wind blows, it has a very silty bottom. It will turn to like milk in certain areas, and that's what was going on. So it was obvious that Casey felt that it was important to have that type of soft plastic on there during that time. It's larger, it pushes more water, it presents itself in water with a certain water pressure coming off the front of it that fish can sense. And then the other key was dropping it right smack in front of the target. So the sight fishing was very exciting for me. These snook were really, really big, close to 40 inches. They were laid up on the edge of a channel where he could see them from a poling platform. I could barely make out the shadow. I didn't even know which way they were headed, where the head was. So he would get all that done, and if I dropped that thing right where it was supposed to be, they would hit it and just take off. Very exciting. This time around, the water was clear. Things had settled. This was a full 2.5 weeks later now. Winds had calmed. Water was much more normal looking up in the upper areas. A little bit of grass in the floating, but nothing ridiculous. And so thus the switch. So I used to do the same thing. Was you adjust for watercolor, you adjust for the depth that you want to fish in. But I'd never seen anything that radical. I really thought we'd be using the same sort of soft plastic on an offset, but no, now we're using jigs. He really wanted to get that bait down to the bottom, and he wanted to make sure it was hopping off the bottom, creating like a dust blow up, which he said gets those fish much more interested. We also had tarpon up there. We had small tarpon. I landed one, lost one. Uh, an abundance of snook, abundance of ladyfish. There were ladyfish everywhere, which that's okay. It's pretty cool. Not to mention we saw crocodiles. I got excited. Crocodiles are so cool. Florida's loaded with alligators. Crocodiles are quite rare, saltwater crocs. There's an area up in the northeast end of Florida Bay where you are restricted. You can't even go in there with a boat or anything for that matter because of the crocs. They nest up in those areas. And obviously it's working because Janelle and I, the years that we spent fishing in Florida Bay, we saw one or two. We saw four, maybe five. I think it might have been five in one day, in one trip up there. So that was pretty remarkable. So he sensed that. I mean, he was like, this will work better. And it did. It worked great. And then, of course, the flies worked even better when we got down to where the tarpon were. He also, Casey off the poling platform, while we were searching for other fish, I think we were searching for reds. Yeah, we were searching for reds, which we did not get this trip. However, he managed to pull two triple tail up off the bottom. Now, to me, that's really weird because in the world of West Coast fishing, triple tail are associated with floating debris. Typically a bag or a channel marker or a crab pot buoy, something like that. They like to nuzzle up against those. And we search for them on the West Coast that way. This was totally different. As a matter of fact, later in the day, we searched for triple tail in open water, just heavy current coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. These fish would swim by on the surface. Unfortunately, no big ones. They were all fairly small, ones and twos. There was one little group of three. And they'd immediately submerge the moment they saw you. So we really didn't have any shots in them, but they weren't really big enough to take to dinner. So it was something that we were like, all right, let's move on and do something else. But that switch in the lures really got me. Again, there was another, teaching the old dog a new trick. That's pretty much what that was all about. Now, while this part here is not really a learning thing so much, it's more of an admiration. He used quality equipment. He used Luma spin rods. Really beautiful equipment, well kept. Fly rods, same way. He just the T-bore reels, things like that. Just the little details like that. Quality fly line that was obviously clean, didn't have a speck of dirt on it, no salt on it. He takes care of his equipment, and he's proud of the equipment that he has out there, and that says a lot to me. as a fisherman, as an angler, not so much even as a guide. Just, I did the same thing when I was guiding. I wanted to make sure that my equipment was top notch, that people would ask me, hey, what is this I'm using? Where do I get one of these? So that means you've done good, that you've handed them something. His boat is orderly. He keeps everything in place right where he knows how to get to it, the easiest way to get there. The boat's 17 feet. It's not huge, but it's perfect for getting to where you need to go. It's a little Maverick. It isn't the newest boat in the whole collection of boats that were at the marina, but it's well kept, and it gets him where he needs to go, and it got us where we need to go. And lastly, friends on the water. Last thing, friends on the water. Something that I used a lot as a guide. You start to get a core group around you of other guides, and you use that telephone. You use the text. You do what you can to talk to each other, to find out what's going on out there. If you're struggling, you call another guide and find out what he's up to. And you may find he'll say, I'm struggling. And I was very impressed with Casey. When we got, he'd been chatting off and on with, I believe, 2 other people that were on the water. And I asked him, I did ask him about it. I said, you have a whole group of guys? He goes, no, we have a core group. And that told me exactly what I needed to know. They had too many secrets, and they didn't want everybody knowing about it. But he had this core group of people that he worked with. And the core group meaning maybe 2 others, because it seemed like everybody was on the water as far as the guides were concerned. There wasn't a lot of boat traffic from boaters because it was a weekday, but the guides were definitely out. And we stopped seeing them when we got all the way up where we were. I mean, I don't think I saw but 1 or 2 other boats. I was impressed with the fact that he had been chatting back and forth with this one person, and they were relaying what was going on. He was talking about our early tarpon hits and takes and the snook and Janelle snook. And, he was letting the guy know what was going on, what he was using, things like that, which that's impressive. You have to have that to have a quality trip with a really good guide. Conversing with other guides is, I think, important, even if you're older. I mean, even if you've been at it a long time, nothing wrong with talking with other people. And when we got that first tarpon, he immediately picked the phone up and called his buddy and said, I'm at blah, blah. I'm sitting at blah, blah, and you need to get over here now. And he brought the boat. The boat showed up about, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes later. Wherever that guy was, he must have had a hell of a run. And he put his guy on the bow and hooked up almost immediately. And all of them were waving at us, and we're waving back and putting fists in the airs and thumbs up, because that's the joy of fishing, being able to share that moment, not only with the people on the boat, but with another boat, just the high of it. That's the only way I can, just the high of it. It's the same thing when I kayak with guys on different kayaks, and all of us join in the same exhilaration from that one fish. It doesn't matter if you caught it or not. You're just happy somebody else did. After that fish was landed, they switched. You had 2 people on board the boat. The guy sitting down got up, grabbed the fly rod, went after it, and got another one. And so, that to me is what it's really about. That shows me that Casey cares, and he cares about people having a great time on the water, to the point of where he shares it with another guide to get more people out there to fish and to enjoy what the Florida Keys have to offer. So to sum this up, a very young guide, excellent at what he does, excellent at showing this old guy what to do, this old dog some new tricks, learning things about just little details and stuff like that. And honestly, I cannot wait to get back out there on the water with him. Already talking about doing a June trip, so if it happens, I'll let you know. So I really had a great time, and yes, it wasn't just amazing, it was epic. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you taking the time to tune in. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell a friend and share it on social media, and leave a review. My next podcast will be available on May 31st. Mark your calendar. Catch Outdoors is hosted by Anchor and available via Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Facebook page is Catch Outdoors. Website, catchoutdoors.com. Until next time, get outdoors and enjoy.